Okay.
Okay.
Okay, start.
Okay. All right. This week, at least in America, it's Parshas Balak. And the Rambam, at the end of Hilchos Malachim, so he discusses about the coming of Moshiach, the belief in the coming of Moshiach. And the Rambam makes a comment that not only are we required to believe in the coming of the Moshiach, in the coming of the Redeemer, the one who will, in a sense, offer both spiritual and physical salvation to the Jewish people and return them to their land and return them to the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of God. But the Rambam adds a word. He says, we have to look forward. We have to look forward to his coming. It's not enough to believe that he's coming. The Rambam says we have to look forward to his coming. In other words, to believe he's coming and to look forward to his coming. Wait for his coming. So according to some, that means that it's not enough to believe that Moshiach will come, let's say, in 100 years. But you have to believe that your Moshiach can come at any time. And the person has to, but it doesn't mean that you have to believe that he necessarily will come tomorrow. But you have to believe that it's possible that Moshiach will come tomorrow. And so and Rambam says, and one who doesn't do that, one who doesn't believe in the coming of Moshiach, or one who doesn't look forward or is not waiting for the coming of Moshiach. So the Rambam says he is not only rejecting the words of the Nevi'im, the words of the prophets, but he is also rejecting the words of the Torah. And he says that the Torah, in a sense, indicates to us about the coming of Mashiach, the Torah being in the five Chumashim. So, but in three different places. The first place is in Parshas Nitzavim, where we read about the mitzvah of tshuva. It's not clear that the Rambam understood the pasuk to be dealing with the mitzvah of tshuva, but it's dealing, according to the Rambam, with the commitment of God that the Jewish people are going to, that the Jewish people are going to return. It says, "V'hayu ki yavo alecha kol v'meila habrach v'atzlola." So it will happen when all these things will take place to you, the blessings and the curse. And v'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha, you shall return to your God. V'shamata b'chol kolo. So that you shall and you'll listen to his voice. K'chol asher anochi mitzavcha hayom. As I commend you today, and then Vishav, and God will bring back to you bring you back from your captivity and have mercy on you, and he will gather you in from all the people to which your God had scattered you. And if you are dispersed, you will be at the ends of the heavens. From there, Hashem, God will bring you. So these are words where God talks about the returning of the Jewish people, returning to him and returning to the land. So here there is a commitment that God gives a commitment that the Jewish people are going to return. And the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva regarding these same psukim, regarding these same verses, says, "Uchvar hitticha Torah." The Torah has given a command, Shasidin Yisrael Lasos Tshuva, that the Jewish people will do tshuva and return to God, and God will return them to their land. So this is one pasuk, one section of the Torah where God talks about the future redemption. But then there's another section, and that is in this week's Sedra. In this week's Sedra, now the way the Ram going to explain the psukim, the way the Rambam explains it, when Balak was the prophet, a non-Jewish prophet, who hated the Jewish people. Why he was given prophecy is a question. God wanted that the nations of the world should not have a claim. If you had made one of us a prophet, like you made Moshe Rabbeinu a prophet for the Jewish people, then we would have turned out like the Jewish people. So in order that they shouldn't have that claim, God gave them a prophet. And who did he choose as the prophet? Bilam Harasha. Why? Because he was the one that the nations of the world all looked up to in that time period. And then Balak tried to get the services of Bilam to curse the Jewish people, because apparently, because of the prophecy that he was endowed with, which he was not deserving of, but because of the prophecy that he was endowed with, so his brachos, his blessings and his curses had some special effect. And Balak wanted him to curse the Jewish people. And he felt that if the Jewish people would be cursed, then he would have a hope of defeating and destroying the Jewish people. And he promised Bilam all kinds of rewards, monetary rewards, rewards of respect and regard, if he would accomplish this task of cursing the Jewish people. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God did not let Bilam curse the Jewish people. And instead of curses, words of blessings came out of the mouth of Bilam. And before, and at a certain point, it became obvious that Bilam will not succeed in cursing the Jewish people. So Bilam leaves Balak, but he does leave him with a message. And he says to him, first, according to the Medrash, he gave him advice how he might be successful in attacking the Jewish people. But then he says, Erenu v'loata, I see him, but not now. And who is him? So him is, according to the Rambam, I see David, King David. He's speaking about the monarchy of the Jewish people. So he says, I see a monarchy. I see the king of the Jewish people. I see King David, but not now. I see him prophetically. I see him in the future. Ashurenu, I behold him, v'lo karov. I behold him, but not near. And according to the Rambam, the second expression, Ashurenu, I see him, or I behold him, but not near, that's not talking about King David. That's talking about Moshiach, the ultimate redeemer of the Jewish people, who will be served as the king of the Jewish people in the future. And then the Rambam continues in explaining the pasuk. Dorach kolchav miyakov, there shall step forth a star out of Jacob. And the Rambam says that has reference again to King David. Become Shavit mi-Yisrael, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. Umochatz, so Dorach Kolchav ben Yaakov, the Rambam says, a star shall step forth out of Jacob. That has reference to King David. Become Shavit me Yisrael, a scepter shall rise out of Israel. That has reference to the King Moshiach, who will be the ultimate redeemer of the Jewish people. And then he says, Umochatz pasei Moab, and he shall smite the corners of Moab. That was something that was done by King David. V'karka kol b'nei sheis, and he shall break down or destroy. And Targum Onkelos explains it a little different. Targum Onkelos explains it, and he shall rule over all the sons of Sheis. Who was Sheis? Sheis was the son of Adam. Adam initially, he had Cain and Hevel. Cain killed Hevel, it's well known. The dispute over the sacrifices. Cain brought a sacrifice, and Hevel, according to some, was only following the lead of Cain. But nevertheless, the attitude that Cain had was not a good attitude, whereas Hevel's attitude was good. But Hevel, according to some of the commentaries, Hevel did not have the ability to initiate something. He was a follower. The Hevel Hevi Gamhu. Hevel also brought a sacrifice, but the first one to bring a sacrifice was Cain. And Hevel was only an imitator. So Hevel was only followed the example of Cain, but nevertheless, of course, the motive of Hevel was much more pure than the motive of Cain. But when God accepted the sacrifice of Hevel and did not accept the sacrifice of Cain, Cain killed Hevel. So see, and ultimately, Cain's descendants were killed in the Mabul, were killed in the flood. So who survived the flood? Who survived from the descendants of Adam Arishon, of Adam? Who were the survivors? The survivors were only the descendants of Adam's third son, Sheis. So he says, so in other words, the descendants of Sheis, that represents the survivors of the flood. So the Moshiach, according to the Rambam, will rule, if we explain it like Targum Onkelos, will rule over all the people of Sheis, or destroy all the people of Sheis. It's very difficult to understand. So we have to understand why mention the Bnei Sheis here. Let's just say he will rule over the people of the world. Moshiach, not necessarily in a bad way. Moshiach is somebody that's going to be recognized. And then he says, and this is the way the Rambam continues for another two psukim. The first part of the pasuk is talking about King David. The second part of the pasuk is talking about Moshiach. Now, the question is, what does the word v'karka kol b'nei shesh? So Rashi seems to understand it. To me, well, the Rambam, I explained, the karka kol b'nei shesh, that he will rule over the people of Shesh. That's the way the Targum Onkelos explains it. However, Rashi, he explains these psukim as not dealing with Mashiach. Later psukim, he says, deal with Mashiach. But these psukim are all dealing with King David. And he says, V'karka kol b'nei shesh means that he will break down or undermine all the sons of Shesh. Now we can understand the use of the terminology, even though it raises questions in regard to the opinion of the Rambam, because the Rambam is saying that it's talking about Moshiach, and Moshiach is going to deal with the whole world. But according to Rashi, the karka kol b'nei shesh, which he interprets to mean he'll break down, or will undermine, or destroy the foundation. He says it comes from the word of digging, destroying the foundation of the sons of Shesh. Where do we find that King David universally destroyed the foundation of Shesh? Moshiach, perhaps we can understand. Moshiach will deal all of mankind. But King David, yes, he was a warrior, and he attacked those that were enemies of the Jewish people. But he certainly was not, when we think of King David, we do not think in universal terms. We think in terms of the nations that had confrontation with the Jewish people, but not in universal terms. So why is it, according to Rashi, that the pasuk karka kol b'nei shesh, that he'll break down, or he will dig up the foundation, or break the foundation of all the descendants of Shesh, is mentioned in regard to King David? We don't see that. And even according to Rashi, why emphasize the idea of Shesh? Just say, of all mankind, that he will rule over all of mankind. When I talk about him ruling over all of mankind, I don't mean that he will act in an improper manner. On the contrary, he will bring mankind closer to God. He will inspire them to understand what is the proper way. But why emphasize the word Shesh here, the sons of Shesh? Just say mankind, all the nations of the world. Why all of a sudden? We haven't heard about Shesh since Chumash Bereshis, since the beginning of Chumash Bereshis. All of a sudden, we talk of all of mankind as the sons of Shesh. Why emphasize the sons of Shesh? Now, okay, then the Rambam says there's a third proof, third indication in the Torah of the coming of Moshiach. In Shoftim, Perek Yutes, Pasuk Ches. So the Torah tells us about the Arei Miklat, that the Arei Miklat were cities that were set aside. If somebody killed somebody b'shogeg by mistake, So he found safety in the Arei Miklat in certain cities that were set aside. And there, in Pasuk in Parak Yutes, Pasuk Ches, the Torah tells us, if God will expand your territories, and he will give you all the lands that he promised to your ancestors, so then you will add 3 more Arei Miklat. And the Rambam says, the Rambam says, nothing is mentioned in the Torah for no purpose. And he explains more or less the Yachiv, not if God, but when God will expand your territories. So you'll make 3 Arei Miklat. And we know that hasn't happened yet. So obviously there will be a time when the Jewish people will retake possession of Eretz Yisrael, but not just the lands that they took possession of in the time of Yoshua. But there will be additional lands that were promised to Avraham Avinu, that were promised to our patriarch Abraham. And we will add 3, and when that happens, we will be required to add 3 more cities to serve as a refuge for people who need to go to a refuge for their safety. Now the question is, so obviously this is talking about some time in the future when the Jewish people will return to the land of Israel. Not just return, but take possession of lands that they previously did not have, but was promised to them by God. So this is the 3rd place. Now the question is, what does each of these places tell us? Now the mitzvah of tshuva, the commitment to God that the Jewish people will return to him, both spiritually and to their land. That talks about the spiritual redemption. And it talks about all the Jewish people returning to the land of Israel. And I mentioned many times what my uncle said, a very beautiful thought. My uncle said that we have to look forward to Moshiach being able to come at any moment. Not that he necessarily will come tomorrow, but we have to believe that he could come tomorrow. And the Rambam says the Moshiach is not going to come unless the Jewish people do tshuva, return to him. So how is it possible, on one hand, to believe that Moshiach can come tomorrow, and on the other hand, to believe that we could be redeemed tomorrow? I look forward, I wait for him every day that he should come on that day. How is it possible? Especially in view of the Rambam Paskin saying Yisrael Nigalon B'Tshuva, the Jewish people will only be redeemed with tshuva, with repentance, with return. My uncle said, our belief in the coming of Moshiach is grounded in our belief in the Jewish people. We have to believe that the Jewish people can return to God at every moment. They can do tshuva today, they can do tshuva tomorrow. And that's how we can believe that Moshiach can come today, Moshiach can come tomorrow. So this pasuk talks about belief in the Jewish people, belief in the spiritual return of the Jewish people. What does the psukim the verses in Parshas Balak that I just read, that I explained according to the Rambam, and I explained it according to Rashi. Well, according to the Rambam, that tells us that the belief in Moshiach is not just the belief in the nation, that God will redeem the nation. But we have to believe in a personal Moshiach as well. There will be a Moshiach who will serve as king of the Jewish people. He will lead the Jewish people. He will rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. He will help gather as God's representative, as God's agent. He will gather the Jewish people from the four corners of the earth. And he will lead the Jewish people on a spiritual path. But it'll be an individual who will do it. So that's the belief in a personal Moshiach. I see him, Bilam said, but not close. At that point, it wasn't close. He sensed, because through prophetically the coming of an individual who was Moshiach. So the Ashurenu v'lo karov, I behold him, but not close. So the question is, but for us, we have to behold him, that it could be close. But so in one hand, these psukim come and tell us, which the Shaftar Hashem Lakecha does not focus on the idea of an individual Mashiach, a personal Mashiach. It speaks of the return of the Jewish people, of God returning his people. But here we're talking about a person who is God's agent to return the Jewish people. But what's even more interesting and somewhat troubling, to be honest, is who tells us about the return of the Jewish people? Who tells us about the fact that there's going to be a personal Mashiach, a king Mashiach? It was Bilam Arasha. Okay, he was a prophet, didn't deserve prophecy. But for whatever reason, God felt it was necessary to have him serve as a prophet for the nations of the world. Why was it important that the revelation about the personal Moshiach should be given through a non-Jewish prophet, not to talk about a prophet who was a wicked person? And I think there are two reasons for it. One is because Moshiach, yes, he's the leader of the Jewish people. He will be, in the words of the Rambam, he will be Karov LaMoshe. He will be close to Moshe. He won't reach the level of Moshe, but he will be outstanding spiritually. Greater, it seems, than all the prophets, with the exception of Moshe Rabbeinu. So he will serve. He will serve as the Redeemer. So, and he will be the leader of the Jewish people. But in addition to be the leader of the Jewish people, he will give leadership to the whole world. Moshiach, on one hand, is a nationalistic, religious figure for the Jewish people. But he is a universal figure. And as a universal figure, he will lead the world in the way of God. That the world, he will acquaint the world with knowledge of God. So he's, to a certain degree, while he's mainly the redeemer of the Jewish people, on a certain level, he's the redeemer of the whole world. So in order to emphasize that point, the revelation in the Torah about this personal Moshiach is done through a non-Jewish prophet. But I think it's more than just that. There is a story I heard from my father regarding Reb Chaim Volozhiner. Shortly after the Vilna Gaon died, so the Jews of what was Russia in certain periods of time became Lithuania. So because of the anti-Semitism and the suffering that the Jewish people were undergoing at the hands of the nations of the world, at the hands of the non-Jewish communities in whose midst they lived, there was a desire, a strong desire, and halachically we should have such a desire, to see as if we are standing at the doorstep of the period of Moshiach. There was this sense of desperation. It wasn't just because the halacha required it, but there was a certain sense of desperation. And perhaps the halacha requires us to be desperate. But when the halacha requires us to be desperate, to feel desperate, it doesn't mean that we should not be in contact with reality. But sometimes when we become desperate, we lose contact with reality. And we begin to believe in things that are not the way that they really are. Now, sometimes when you're at a hospital and you have a close relative that's sick, and you're troubled, and you begin to believe that the relative is recuperating. And unfortunately, the situation is not that way. But those are the tricks that desperation, it's the effect that desperation has upon us. And because of that, unfortunately, there were periods of time that allowed false messiahs to arise. And why did people believe in them? Because of that sense of desperation. There was Shabtai Tzvi. There were others as well. And there were people that were beginning in the Vilna area to believe there was a newcomer there. And for whatever reason, people were beginning to believe that he was Moshiach, that he was the Messiah, that he was the Redeemer of Israel. And there were those connected with the Tsarist government, with the Russian government, that suspected that belief was the seeds of revolt against the Tsar. And at that time, in that section of Russia, which later Lithuania, so the religious leader of the Jewish people, certainly among the Misnagdim, was Reb Chaim Volozhiner. Among the Chassidim, it was the Baal Tanya. So apparently, this false Messiah was apparently identified as a misnakid. I assume that's the reason they came to Reb Chaim Volozhiner perhaps. And one of the members of the Russian government had a meeting with Reb Chaim Volozhiner. And they asked Reb Chaim Volozhiner, do you believe that this man is the Moshiach? And Reb Chaim Volozhiner asked him, do you believe that this man is Moshiach? So the man laughed. He said, me? Of course I don't believe it. I'm not Jewish. Chaim Volozhiner said, when the Mashiach comes, you will believe it also. And what I just would like to add, that it's very possible that some of the Jewish people will come to believe that Mashiach is Mashiach when they see their non-Jewish neighbors believe in the Jewish Mashiach, recognize the Jewish Mashiach. So in a sense, we could say, and perhaps that was the message that Reb Chaim Volozhiner was giving, that when Mashiach comes, it's not only that he is going to offer leadership to the rest of the world, but he will be recognized in Mashiach by all the people of the earth. So perhaps that's the reason why it was important that Bilam should be. Now, so in other words, we have a double aspect here. On one hand, the psukim, the verses in Parshas Balak that speak of Moshiach, they come to tell us that there'll be a personal Moshiach. At the same time, they tell us that this Moshiach it could be understood, he will have a universal perspective. He will give leadership to the whole world. And he will even be recognized when he comes by the whole world. There must be a connection between this idea of the universalistic perspective of Mashiach on one hand and the personal Mashiach on the other hand. And then, as far as the last proof that the Torah speaks of Mashiach, I think that's to tell us that ultimately all of Eretz Yisrael will be returned to the Jewish people. All of Eretz Yisrael, not only all of Eretz Yisrael will return to the Jewish people, but even the territories that the Jewish people did not yet in their history take possession of, but were only promised to Avraham Avinu, will be returned to the Jewish people. This is, I think, the ideas that the three verses, or the three groups of verses cited by the Rambam, communicate to us. Now in Parshas Bereshis, the Torah tells us, "Vayeda Adam es Chava Ishto v'Telid Bein." So Adam, that Chava gave birth. This is after this is after the after the Cain, after Hevel was killed by Cain. So Chava gave birth to another son, and she called his name Sheish. Why? Why Sheish? So because God has provided me another child in place of Hevel, in place of Abel, for Cain has killed him. So the simple reading of the pasuk indicates that Shais was in place of Hevel. However, there's a very strange medrash on that pasuk that the medrash seems to imply that, on the contrary, that Shais was in the place of Cain. The medrash says, "Ki shasli alikim zera acher tachas Hevel ki hargo chai Cain." So the medrash says that because God gave me another seed in place of Hevel, because he was killed by Cain. The Medrash says the mechatia shel Hevel, because of the sin that was done in Hevel, because of the murder that was committed against Hevel. So that's why he got chased. Mashal l'shnei ilanos, the Medrash says. It could be compared to two trees, shahiyu smuchim zeh l'zeh, that were close one to the other. And one tree was destroyed by a wind and fell on the other tree. And that destroyed the other tree as well. So the Medrash says, because of the sin that was done to Hevel, Cain was killed. So it seems that Shais was given not just in place of Hevel, but to a certain degree in place of Cain as well, at least in place of Cain. Now, obviously, to the simple reading of the pasuk is that it was in place of Hevel, and to Chava, it was her missing son, so it was place of Hevel. But on a certain level, the Medrash says, Shais was given in place of Hevel. And the question is, how is that to be understood? And there was an article that was written by Rabbi Goldvich. He was the first Rosh Yeshiva of Kerem B'Yavne. It was published in a sefer that was put out on my uncle's 80th birthday in honor of my uncle. I think it's called Beis Harav. And Kavod Harav. And he asks the question regarding this pasuk. And then he mentions that regarding Lot, the Torah says, the Gam Lot, Lot also had Sona Bakar, had cattle, Ba'alim, and 2 tents. And who are the 2 tents? One is Rus and Nama, the son of Shlomo HaMelech. But Rus primarily, the wife of Shlomo HaMelech. The Rus is one of the tents because she was a descendant of Lot. And he mentions that in the same pasuk, regarding the pasuk in Tehillim, Perek Peites. So Amar B'Yitzchak, the pasuk in Tehillim, Perek Peites says, Matzasi David Avdi. Where did I find him? The Medrash says. The Medrash says, I found him in Zdom. What does it mean that he found him in Zdom? Now, the Shem Mishmuel brings in the name of his grandfather, the Kotzker, he says that it's very strange. He says Malchus, kingship, was something that was not natural to the Jew. One Jew does not rule naturally over another Jew. And in order to have Malchus, in order to have royalty, in order to have a king, the perception of kingship, the power of kingship, the idea of kingship had to be brought from foreign sources. And the foreign sources was Moab. And that's why Moab is the foundation of Malchus based of it. He says Shaul was also a king. But Shaul was a weak king. Shmuel criticizes Shaul. He says, you were a failure as king because you didn't understand what it means to be the leader of the Jewish people. You didn't have that strength. And it's understandable to a certain degree why Shaul didn't have that strength. Because naturally, all Jews are one. And kingship is, there's somebody that's above all of us. And that had to be imported when it was important to be imported. But that couldn't be a natural trait of the Jewish people. And why couldn't it be a natural trait of the Jewish people? The answer is very simple. Because that trait, unless it's harnessed properly, is spiritual destruction. We have to show strength. We have to, in a sense, be uncompromising. We have to rule. When it comes to show, we shouldn't be arrogant. But there are times when we have to show strength, even chutzpah, when it comes to the spiritual. But when it comes to the mundane, then the contrary. If it had been a natural trait of the Jewish people, this is what I think, then it would have been used much more so for the wrong things. It had to be acher, it had to be from another source. What's the idea? It's not something that should be naturally us, but it's a talent that we use, a tool that we use to accomplish certain things. If someone is naturally a chutzav, has chutzpah, if someone is naturally arrogant, then he destroys the world. But there are times when we have to use that trait. It can't come from within us. It has to come from somewhere else. Because it can't be that that's who we are. And the Shem Shmuel says also that to a certain degree, Shem Shmuel says that to a certain degree, Hevel did not have this trait of chutzpah. Hevel was like, he was nothing. He didn't even initiate giving the sacrifices. It was Cain who initiated giving the sacrifices. But his motives were impure. Now, when Cain was born, so see, Kanisi Ish Chava said, as Hashem, I acquired him. She wanted Cain to use these traits of chutzpah, of Azus, on behalf of God, on behalf of spirituality. But Cain did not. Cain used it on behalf of Olam Hazeh, of this world. So in a sense, and as a result of the death of Hevel, Cain also did not have any descendants. So the strength that was necessary for Malchus had to come from another source. And that other source was Sheish. This is what the Shem Shmuel says. And the Shem Shmuel says a person has to say, on one hand, he has to say, Bishvili Nivra Olam, the world was created for me. When it's necessary to have that attitude in the spiritual realm, the world was created for me. But Chas v'Shalom, to have it in other attitude. Cain had the attitude, Bishvili Nivra Olam. In the mundane world, he wanted the whole world for himself. So this was in Zdom, Lot. Lot did chesed. On one hand, on the other hand, Lot rebelled against Abraham, the Medrash tells us. He saw when Abraham told him, choose a place, and he chose to go to Zdom. It was a way of getting away from Abraham. It was a way of getting away from the God of Abraham, the Medrash says. But still, that meat of chesed that he learned by Abraham was with him. And Lot had this trait of strength. He applied it even, perhaps in an improper way, but he coupled it with the chesed that he did. In other words, the people of Sodom were ready to kill him. The people of Sodom burned, the Medrash tells us, his older daughter because she helped the poor man. She was burned alive. And the whole city of Sodom surrounded his house, demanding that he give over the Malachim. And at that time, it wasn't known that there were Malachim. And he said, no. Of course, he acted improperly. He said, take my daughters. What did it show? It showed that he had chutzpah. And he was even able to use that chutzpah. He was able to use that chutzpah together with chesed. I think the main problem with Lot was he had the meat of chesed. He had chutzpah and was able to combine that meat of chutzpah with chesed. But he didn't see it. He didn't feel attached to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in doing it. Because of that, he said, take my daughters. And this trait was passed down to his descendants through Rus. Rus was from the royalty of Moab, the Medrash tells us. She was from the royalty of Moab. And she took those traits. Imagine going with the army. Didn't that take strength? She's the princess. She's the daughter of the king of Moab. and she makes her own determination. I will leave all of that. But she was able to limit that chutzpah to where chutzpah should be used. And that talent, that tool, was the foundation of Malchus Beis David. They were able to rule, but it was only a tool. It was a kli. And all this came from Sheish. Now we can understand why the emphasis on Sheish, Bikarka Kol B'nei Sheish. Why does it say, according to the Rambam, Kol B'nei Sheish? Why did it say Kol Olam, rule over the world? In other words, the B'nei Sheish, they were the ones who perpetuated this idea of chutzpah, of in a sense of arrogance, which should not be a personal trait, but in them it was a personal trait. But Moshiach and David, they used that as a tool to help them serve as kings. So with that tool, the Karka Kopenei Sheish, they were, according to the Rambam, they were able to rule over all the people of Sheish who had that trait naturally. And we could say also, to answer the question about to answer the question according to Rashi that it has reference to David. In other words, what was the foundation? The foundation of Bnei Sheish, that was chutzpah. They had chutzpah, but that was who they were. So David HaMelech, he dug underneath them with the use of the tool of chutzpah, with the use of the tool, in a sense, of God, of Geus. So he was able, the nations of the world thought that Jewish people will never be able to successfully establish a monarchy, because in order to have a monarchy, you have to have this, it has to be part of you, this chutzpah, that it should be part of your personality. So David, it wasn't part of his personality, but he was able to take it as a tool, something that Rus was able to take it, make it from being part of a personality into a tool that she used to show chesed, to Nami. So because of this, so the Karka Kol B'nei Sheish, so David HaMelech, in a sense, was able to break down the foundation of the nations of the world, who felt, he demonstrated that the Jewish people could successfully have a monarchy, even though these traits are not part of their personality. But since they inherited it only as a tool and not as part of their personalities. Okay.
If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
If Ruth became a Giores, then wasn't she the one with Jewish people, and isn't that the spiritual DNA, rather than like Moab, where royalty was a stranger from another culture?
What?
If Ruth became a Giores, then wasn't she the one with the Jewish people, and isn't that the spiritual DNA, rather than Moab, where the royalty was a stranger from another culture?
Yeah, but in other words, but that's only because she worked on herself. And perhaps that was something she got from Naomi also.
Okay, I guess there are no questions.